I'm Paige. Welcome back to my kitchen. You're watching the next episode of Doing It with Paigey. I am so excited because today we are doing the first kneaded bread recipe from the cookbook Bread Baking for Beginners. Today we will be baking a boule. Boule is the French word for ball, and that refers to the shape of this bread. Here is a boule that I made the other day so you can get an idea of what we'll be baking. This recipe is going to help you learn and develop some new, more advanced skills that were not previously covered in the earlier recipes in this book. Some of the new techniques that we'll be trying today is kneading your dough and slashing or scoring your dough before it goes into the oven. Now, this recipe makes 2 loaves, so feel free to cut this recipe in half if you're only looking to make 1 loaf like I will be doing today. That's very easy to do with this book because all of the ingredients are measured out in weight, so if you want to cut a recipe in half, all you have to do is divide the ingredients by 2. Now, since we've been making mostly flatbreads, I'm just going to reintroduce everybody to some equipment that we have used in the past but haven't used in a while, and 1 piece of new equipment. Now, the first thing is a cast iron Dutch oven. You guys might remember this from the first recipe that we did, which was the No-Knead bread. The other piece of equipment that we haven't used in a while is a proofing basket, and I have mine lined with some cloth. And the last thing that we have not used is a lame. Now, this is sort of a razor slashing tool, and we are going to use this to score the top of our bread. Now, the brand of lame that I'm using is Bread Boss's, and I really like this brand because it came with this cool case, some replacement blades, and a sheath to go over the razor. If you have any questions on any of this equipment, I'll link them in the description below. And if you have any other questions or want to know about the equipment used in this book, I will also link my equipment video, and you can find that here. Now let's go ahead and start weighing our ingredients. We'll start off by weighing our flour, water, salt, and yeast. We'll then add the yeast into the water and mix that until it's nice and bubbly. You'll then want to add the flour on top of the water and yeast mixture and the salt on top of the flour. Now, I like to mix by hand because it allows me to really feel when all of the ingredients are well combined. If you don't really feel like getting sticky, you can use a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon to mix the dough together. You're going to want to make sure that you get all of your ingredients really well combined. The key to knowing when that happens is to be able to get your dough really stretchy. That's how you know everything is well mixed. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the dough from my hands and add any excess dough back into the bowl. Now that our dough is well mixed, we're going to let this rest for about 20 minutes to allow the flour to absorb some of that water. Now that our dough is done resting, we're going to go ahead and start kneading it. Before I start kneading, I usually like to have a small bowl of flour with me, just so I can easily sprinkle that onto my countertops, and I usually have my dough scraper in case the dough is too sticky on the counter and I need to release it. I'll use that. But I'm going to go ahead and start by getting the dough out of my bowl. Now I'll want to go ahead and flour my countertops well here. Now I'm going to use my dough scraper to scrape this out of the bowl. And to start kneading, all we're going to need to do is use the heels of your hands. You're going to press forward and pull it back onto itself. You're then going to give the dough a quarter turn and do the same thing. Now, if your dough is really sticky, don't get frustrated. Just add a little bit of flour and just keep working with the dough. If this is your first time kneading, really allow yourself to use this time as practice to get yourself familiar with the process. And we're going to continue to knead the dough for about 5 to 10 more minutes. The dough, as soon as I set it down, it's still pretty slack. It's just kind of relaxing. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is tightened up. That's really what we're aiming for here. You can See, all I'm doing is I'm pushing forward, pulling back, and giving it a turn. So forward, back, turn, forward, back, turn. And if it's getting sticky on the bottom, just use your dough scraper, add a little bit more flour, and just keep working with the dough. As you can see, it's tightening up. We're gonna go ahead and check this in a minute to see if it's done being kneaded. Now, when I first started this book and I first started baking bread, I never really knew when my dough was done being kneaded. So I did a little bit of research and I found out about something called a window pane test. And I'm gonna show you guys what that entails and what to look for when you're kneading your dough. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna just cut off a small piece of dough here. Now the idea here is to hold the dough up to some source of light and pull 4 corners of the dough to make something like a window pane. If your dough tears very easily when you're doing this, it needs to be kneaded for a little bit longer, but ours is looking pretty good. So I'm just gonna knead this for about another minute or so, and then we will be done. Now that our dough is done being kneaded, I'm going to pop this back into the bowl. We are going to let it rise for about 3 hours, so I'll cover it with a kitchen towel and we'll come back and check it then. All right, it's been about 3 hours. We are going to go ahead and get our dough out of the bowl and get it pre-shaped. Okay, here is what our dough looks like. I've got some flour on our countertops right here, and I'm going to go ahead and get this turned out onto the counter. I'm going to use my dough scraper to release this from the bowl. Like I said, just make sure you have a little bit of flour down on your countertops. Now, if you're making the full recipe, this would be the part where you would divide these into 2 pieces, but since I have the recipe, I just have this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our dough scraper and we're going to scrape from under the dough and pull the dough towards us. Now, the goal here is to create even tension across the top of the loaf using the dough scraper. All right, after we have it pre-shaped, I'm just going to dust it with a little bit of flour and cover this up with a floured kitchen towel, and we'll come back and check it in about 30 minutes. Okay, our dough is done resting. I'm going to go ahead and use my dough scraper to turn this over. Now, if you remember from the no-knead bread, we folded our dough like a letter, and we're going to do the same technique here. So start from the top and come down to the middle. Same thing from the bottom. From the left and from the right. Now we're going to turn this over. We're going to use our hands to do that same method where we create tension across the top of the dough. So just use your hands, cup them under the dough, and just pull it towards yourself. Now we have our proofing basket here, and we've got a lot of flour in there, and I'm just going to use my dough scraper to flip this over and put it down into the basket, seam side up. We're going to let it proof for about an hour and a half. While our dough is proofing, I want to go ahead and preheat my oven. I have my Dutch oven inside of the oven, and I'm going to allow that to preheat with the oven. I know that may seem like a long time to preheat your oven, but you really do want a super hot Dutch oven as well as a super hot oven for your bread to rise when you bake it. All right, it's a little bit too early to be checking on our dough. I just want to show you guys what it looks like if you have underproofed dough. So if you poke the dough and it springs right back up, it needs more time. If you poke it and it leaves an indent and it stays, it's ready to go. So we need to let this one proof for about 30 more minutes, and we'll be ready to put it in the oven. Our dough is almost done proofing, and the next stage that we'll be moving on to is baking it. So before we put it into the oven, we are going to be slashing our dough with our lame. Now, I want to talk very briefly about scoring your bread. It is probably the most intimidating part of baking, at least for me. I have tried to get a little bit creative in the past and do my own slashes and my own designs, and I really do like practicing, and I will be doing those in some of my later videos. But for this recipe, since this is the first time we will be scoring our bread, I'm going to do it just like the book says and show you how to slash a big X in your dough. Done proofing, I'm going to go ahead and do the poke test, and it's leaving a pretty good indent, so I'm going to turn this over onto some parchment. Now, scoring is all about confidence. You can add a little bit of oil or water to your blade to make the cut a little bit easier. I'm not going to be doing that today, but that is an option for you. But what you're really going to want here is deep slashes, and you're going to want this at a 30-degree angle. So blade's almost flat against the dough, and you want a deep slash. Now, I don't think it's bad if you go back over the cut. I'm sure a lot of professionals would disagree, but I don't think it's bad. And we're going to do the same thing from this side. There we go. Right, I'm just going to pick my dough up from the parchment and drop it into my Dutch oven. Put the lid on and put this back in for about 25 minutes. It's been about 25 minutes. We just took our bread out and it should look something like this. We are going to put it back in the oven with no lid for another 15 to 20 minutes. Been about 20 minutes. We just took our bread out and here is what it looks like. I know you guys are very eager to cut into your loaves of bread if you're baking this recipe at home, but please be sure to allow it at least 30 minutes to cool down before you slice into it. I've waited 30 minutes. I've been baking all day, so I'm so excited to try this. Let's do a taste test. It's so good. More butter. This bread is great to pair with any meal. I usually make small sandwiches with it. It's also great smeared with butter or jelly or both. It's also great by itself. All right, I'm gonna call my dog over. Dutch. We're gonna do a taste test with Dutch. This is Duchess. She loves bread. She likes it. Okay. It stores best in a paper bag. I usually can keep mine for about 2 to 3 days, but let's be honest, it's gone by day 2. If this is your first time trying this recipe at home, I would definitely recommend doing this recipe 2 to 3 more times just to get yourself a little bit more familiar with the new techniques we learned today. Be sure to tune in next week. We are making kneaded batards. It is a very similar variation of this bread, but it helps you develop a different shaping technique, which is really fun. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, and thanks again for watching Doughing It with Paigey. See you guys next time. Oh, is there a party going on outside? You should have seen my lips. I've got it. I've got it. No. Yeah. What am I trying to say? Toast? What? Toast and jelly? Was that good? It's okay. weird. We didn't do the TikTok with the bread. Don't you TikTok me.